Picture a father bruised from a motorway smash who should not be standing. Paramedics tell him the roof folded to within a finger width of his skull. Statistically, the impact ends consciousness in 94 cases out of 100. He signs the discharge sheet 2 days later and walks away with the uneasy thrill survivors know too well. Quantum immortality frames that thrill as data. In countless branches, the same man never left the wreck. Friends in those lines grieve. His own awareness never touches those funerals, because awareness resides only where neural circuits still light. Multiply one crash by every infectious disease a body outsmarted, every snowfall that missed a cliff edge by meters, every bomb that malfunctioned in the final second. The history of improbable survival is long enough to fill libraries. Insurance firms call it variance, soldiers call it luck, mythmakers call it fate. Everett's mathematics offers a colder translation. The improbable line is inevitable to the observer inside it. If existence keeps forking, there is always at least one path where the pulse persists. That path is the only one consciousness can report from. Skeptics argue we should see a flood of testimonies describing certain death averted every morning. The flood exists. It is buried in hospital charts labeled anomalous remission, in pilot incident reports archived as mechanical mystery, in decades of 1 in a million newspaper features. Remove survivor bias and the pattern still leans high. Sooner or later, statistics suggest each person will face an event with virtually zero chance of escape. Yet biographies keep turning pages. Quantum immortality predicts that from the first-person seat no probability, however tiny, ever crashes to zero. Collective memory delivers subtler hints. Large groups sometimes recall a film quote or a brand logo that never existed, then insist records have shifted. The Mandela effect earns quick dismissal. Misprints, childhood confusion, herd psychology. Many worlds leave space for another reading. A thin slice of observers may have slid from one branch into a neighbor almost identical, carrying vestiges of an earlier timeline. Surface physics offers no instrument to expose the splice, so memory itself becomes the only witness. Harder evidence hides in the equations used every day in semiconductor design and PET scanners. Schrödinger's wave function does not single out which outcome the lab will measure. Engineers accept the spread and still build devices that work. In classrooms, tutors resolve the paradox by saying, the function collapses when we observe. Everett objected, who or what counts as the magical observer? Better, he said, to keep the math honest, no collapse, just branching. When the same rigor is applied to heartbeats and airliner turbine blades, the branching remains. The only novelty is scale. Accept the scale and dread drains from the idea of a final blackout, yet another emotion rises in its place, responsibility. If consciousness rides the survivable rail through an infinite switchyard, the rail is laid by decisions. The route bends at each act of attention, each spoken word, each moral shortcut dodged or taken. Move through life numbed by bitterness and the rails align toward bleak branches where the body lingers but prospects shrink. Cultivate empathy, the landscape brightens. The mechanism is descriptive, not moralistic. Probabilities flow exactly where they must, but the traveler chooses which probabilities to feed. Ethicists studying multiverse models confront a puzzle called quantum selfishness. If an individual is guaranteed a threat of personal survival, what restrains cruelty? Traditional deterrence, jail, reputation, eternal damnation, depend on finite stakes. Many worlds raises the ceiling so high it vanishes from sight. The answer circles back to responsibility. Each harmful act seeds branches where the doer lives with consequences. Broken trust, escalating reprisals, a mind gnawed by its own recordings. Those outcomes still sit along survivable rails. Consciousness does not skip them. Pain simply arrives by different doors. Remove fear of oblivion and another shift appears. Urgency changes shape. Deadlines invented by mortality, publish the book before 40, marry before 30, build a pension before 75, lose their coercive bite. What remains is the urgency of quality. Tomorrow is almost guaranteed, but tomorrow's circumstances are built from today's stance. Waste the day in spite and the inheritance is a lonelier track. Use the day well and the next divergence has more fertile ground. Infinity becomes a canvas, not a safety net. Theology enters through a side gate. Religions that promise paradise or threaten hell grow from the dread of final judgment. Many worlds replaces judgment with neutral arithmetic and yet preserves a strange echo of karma. Actions propagate, feedback returns, no divine clerk required. Ancient seers spoke of lives resetting until lessons sink deep. Quantum immortality sketches the same loop in probabilistic language. A lesson unlearned steers consciousness into branches that keep teaching it, sometimes through harsh repetition, until awareness integrates the pattern and probability tilts away from further pain. What, then, of the body that ages? Biology suggests a hard sunset. Telomeres shorten, stem cells tire, disorders accumulate. In standard physiology, the limit halts everyone near the century mark. Add quantum survival and the tale of improbable longevity lengthens without end. Somewhere in possibility space, medicine advances 1 month ahead of each new failure. A transplant donor appears just in time. A rare gene variant confers extraordinary repair capacity. Awareness clings to that fringe path. The price might be outliving family after family, watching cultures morph until language itself drifts. Immortality by branching is not youth preserved. It is continuity under ever-changing terms. Philosophers call this prospect quantum long haul. It raises practical questions. Would memory remain coherent across centuries of medical patchwork? Neuroscience hints at storage limits. Yet the same neural plasticity that holds traumatic flashbacks also remaps after stroke. Consciousness might adapt indefinitely, forgetting epochs the way middle age forgets toddlerhood. Quality again rests on choices. A mind training in curiosity and compassion may handle centuries without souring, while one sequestered in resentment could find extended life a private hell. The multiverse offers duration. Meaning remains self-authored. Collectively, a species that internalizes quantum immortality would confront systems built on fear. Advertising hooked on urgency loses leverage. Autocrats who trade on terror find crowds less pliable. Schools that teach rote compliance look archaic next to curricula urging ethical agency across infinite timelines. Environmental stewardship gains a sharper edge. If descendants and alternate selves feel the fallout of today's neglect, externalized cost accounting collapses. Each path harmed by climate collapse still harbors observers. They are you in branches where action lagged. Resistance to such a worldview is predictable. Institutions anchored in scarcity rhetorics will brand the theory escapist or hubristic. Some critics warn it could fuel recklessness. Why worry about seat belts if another branch survives? Data on human cognition suggests the opposite. When catastrophic risk feels abstract, paralysis sets in. When risk feels navigable, effort increases. Knowing survival branches exist does not erase pain in the branches that do not. Empathy keeps caution alive. Personal practice begins small. Notice each decision where fear of loss, rather than alignment with purpose, holds the steering wheel. Shift the grip slightly. No list of steps, no ritual schedule, just a repeated micro-choice to favor what builds clarity over what avoids endings. Quantum arithmetic does the rest. You may test the mindset tonight. Recall one earlier moment when odds stacked against you yet life went on. Hold the memory until the pulse of gratitude overrides the echo of fear. The nervous system will file that pattern. At the next divergence, the filing shapes response. Across laboratories, detectors still click, and graduate students still debate what the clicks imply. Everett himself died at 51 in one documented branch. In others, he kept working, refined his model, perhaps lived to see quantum computing vindicate his logic. His personal awareness occupies only the lines where it persisted. Yours is doing the same. Stand back from the chalkboard and the picture resolves. Death occupies more headlines than any other event, yet the only witness who never testifies is the one who crosses it. That silence may not be mystery, it may be mathematics running without collapse. In the reality you read these words, the rail continues. Where it leads depends on the stance you take at the next fork, and the next, with no final terminus in sight. Hospital corridors collect stories that textbooks ignore. A paramedic finishes paperwork for a man pulled from icy water after 20 minutes with no measured heartbeat. The core temperature reads too low for life, yet brain scans later show no damage. A neurologist calls it the diving reflex, but privately she admits the timings sit outside known tolerance. Quantum survival reframes these edge cases as default outcomes along one unbroken consciousness track. To relatives and other branches, the same event ended in a funeral, but no awareness remains there to describe it. Civil aviation logs hold a similar pattern. Flight data recorders preserved instances where dual engines flamed out and restart protocols failed, yet the aircraft glided to a landing that mathematics rated impossible at that altitude. Investigations cite favorable wind shear, lucky alignment with a stretch of clear highway, or pilot cool-headedness. Multiply enough freak combinations and probability reaches into the 10 million to 1 range. Pilots involved often talk of an eerie calm, as if some larger process nudged events into a narrow corridor of survivability. They walk away, adding one more anecdote to the archive of outcomes that had almost no room to exist. Brain research offers microscopic clues. Experiments at the University of Sussex tracked neural avalanches, bursts of electrical activity that propagate like miniature forest fires across cortical tissue. At death, these avalanches become more intense, not less, producing organized patterns for up to 30 seconds after the electrocardiogram goes flat. Standard physiology labels the activity residual noise. A minority of investigators wonder if the surge marks a pivot, the moment awareness seeks the nearest compatible branch where blood still circulates. No consensus, only repeating evidence that the border between living and dead is blurred by design. Skeptics prefer mundane explanations. They note that for every dramatic rescue, countless tragedies follow ordinary statistics. Quantum models concede those tragedies. They occur in branches that remain dark to the survivor. The model predicts an observer-centric bias impossible to measure externally. If some future instrument could sample consciousness across splits, paradox would dissolve. Until then, anecdotes accumulate and the larger theory waits for a generation less attached to classical finality. What does all this mean at street level? Remove the deadline of annihilation and motivation must come from somewhere richer than fear. A painter might tackle larger canvases without worrying about market clocks. A parent might teach children curiosity rather than caution. An entrepreneur could favor research whose payoff lies decades ahead, knowing that some version of the self will live long enough to see results. Responsibility expands with the horizon. Harm lingers because the sufferer inside each branch continues to feel it. Benefit compounds because the giver in each branch keeps reaping broader connection. Ethics under quantum survival lean toward stewardship. When damage to ecosystems drives one timeline toward collapse, consciousness gets funneled toward alternatives that avoided the worst mistakes, but those safe branches may narrow if destructive habits repeat. Probabilities are not infinite invitations to recklessness. They are subtle incentives to align behavior with resilience, because resilient paths grow wider and easier to inhabit. The theory does not guarantee perpetual comfort. You might survive severe injury yet carry chronic pain along the rail. Some branches will hold long convalescence, others advance treatment. Choices made now influence which cluster dominates later experience. Nutrition, community, mental flexibility, all simple factors that tilt probability fields toward more functional bodies and minds. Quantum physics never overrides biology, it only selects among biological outcomes already on the table. Astrophysicists push the implications further. If observers persist, then at cosmological scales life should appear at epochs long after stars fade, living on quantum fluctuations and vast engineered habitats. That prospect recasts humanity's current moment as early adolescence rather than approaching twilight. It is impossible to feel small and temporary while contemplating such a timeline. The emotion that replaces smallness is obligation. To keep learning, to leave toolkits not ruins, to ensure that whichever path awareness follows remains interesting. Cultural narratives have started to adapt. Popular films toy with multiverse premises, though most still cling to climactic deaths for dramatic closure. The audience leaves theaters with a double image: hero dies here, lives there. Younger viewers accept the coexistence without discomfort. They switch mental tracks effortlessly. Philosophy classrooms report similar shifts. Freshmen raised on parallel world storytelling find linear determinism unconvincing and ask instead how agency operates when alternatives always exist. Professors scramble to update syllabi. None of this eliminates grief. When a loved one dies, you face an absence that hurts precisely because consciousness persists on your own line while vanishing from local interaction. Quantum survival offers a thought. Somewhere else the conversation continues. That suggestion can comfort or disturb depending on temperament. The important point is to honor the loss inside this branch. Meaning arises from presence, and presence is always local even if identity sprawls across infinity. Practical experiment is possible. Pick one small fear-driven habit, maybe the nightly doom scroll, maybe the reluctance to apply for a course. Drop it for a week while noting mood shifts. The multiverse will oblige either way. You are simply choosing which version of yourself you will meet next month. Observe the change in daily texture. A fraction more calm, a conversation that opens a door, a problem solved sooner. Tiny choices flick probability levers. Proofs appear as changed contingencies. If the premise feels speculative, consider that the entire digital economy already banks on quantum effects. Laser scanners, MRI diagnostics, flash memory, all run on equations that ignore classical certainty. The leap from microchips to life philosophy is shorter than it seems. Engineers accept superposition as fact. Thinkers can apply the same fact to identity without contradiction. Eventually the body you occupy will face probabilities so steep that even the wildest branch requires unfamiliar medical technology or social conditions. When that threshold arrives, the theory predicts you will find yourself waking in a facility where those conditions exist. Perhaps an exoskeleton compensates for nerve decay, perhaps a culture treatises extended consciousness maintenance as routine. You might call the adaptation a blessing or a burden. Either way, awareness remains continuous and the next set of decisions begins. Legacy changes meaning in this frame. Instead of a monument aimed at descendants, you may focus on seeding tools that help whichever future self encounters them. Code repositories, ecological corridors, conflict resolution methods. Someone in a later century, and statistically that someone is also you, will benefit. The scientist who sparked this conversation burned out of mainstream academia, died young in the branch history remembers, and was cremated with little ceremony. In other branches he kept working and witnessed the laser age his equations enabled. His fate illustrates the model. External records show termination. Internal continuity slips past the obituary unnoticed. That dual story already belongs to each person reading these words. Step back from the thought experiment and you hold two clear options. Continue living under the clock of extinction and let fear script behavior, or accept that consciousness navigates a probability sea where final blackout never arrives, and act from curiosity and responsibility instead. One mindset shrinks possibilities, the other expands them. Physics does not dictate what you choose, it only hands you the rail network. Choose and the next divergence unfolds. Evidence will follow quietly in the shape of outcomes that align with the stance you took. And somewhere, separated from this sentence by a single quantum decision, another version of you is making the opposite choice. Neither is wrong. Only one is the reality you will remember tomorrow.